Hello, everyone. Welcome to, my name is Angela Brown, and I'm the Technical Services Librarian at Amherst Town Library and the chair of the Technical Services Committee, the host of the NHLA Technical Services Committee, the host of today's program. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's presentation, Cataloging with Homosaurus, Who, What, When, Why, and How, presented by J.L. Colbert. Jay is the library director at the Longy School of Music of Bard College. His research focuses broadly on language and ethics and metadata, knowledge organization and management, and queer theory. Jay serves on the editorial board of the Homosaurus International LGBTQ+ linked data vocabulary. He has further interest in digital scholarship and copyright. So please put any questions into the chat as you have them, and Jay will answer any clarifying questions during the presentation and any more in-depth questions at the end. At the end of the presentation, please use the hand raise feature under reactions if you'd like to unmute and ask a question. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Jay to get today's presentation started.
Thank you, Angela. I'm really excited to do this today. And that's so many people from all over the country apparently registered, and not just New Hampshire. That's really fun. So yes, if you have questions, like put them in the chat and maybe put like a Q colon or something in front of it just to help make it easier for me to see what's a question and what's not. And I'll try to leave around 20 minutes at the end for questions. It depends on how many I'm seeing in the chat, how many hand raises we have, how many participants there are. At minimum, I'll give 15. And if we go short, then you get some free time. You get some free time back with an early meeting. So again, this is Cataloging with the Homosaurus. I am the library director at the Longy School of Music of Bard College. I am not in New York. Longy is in Cambridge, like right in Harvard Square, common misconception. This presentation is done all in plain text files. This is just an HTML file I opened in my browser. If you would like the plain text files that make up this presentation, you can find them in my GitHub repository, where I try to put all of my talks that I give. And so you could also open this in your browser and follow along if you wanted. Or you could read the plain text files in GitHub or in something like TextEdit or VS Code or anything like that. All right, let's get going. So what we're going to do is I try to be clever and we're going to go who, so that's introducing me. What is going over like what the Homosaurus is. When is sort of when do you use certain terms and whatnot, like some of that clarifying, like what's the difference between this and this? When might you use this term? Why? Why might you use things? And then how? I'm not going to go too in depth about MARC cataloging. This is more of a general overview, but there will be some things about like how you do subdivisions, because I know that's a big question people tend to have when they use the Homosaurus. If you are wanting to, continue this discussion, I am realizing I forgot to put it in the presentation, but there is now a like Google group listserv for people who use the Homosaurus. And I'll try to find that at some point in the presentation, or if someone's on it and wants to like drop that in the chat or something, that would be really fun. All right. And then at the end, I'll leave some time for questions. But in between each of these little sections, if there's little clarifying questions or like, could you repeat something or explain this, I'll do that then. But longer questions, please save those until the end. All right. So who? So my name is J.L. Colbert, and it's not Colbert. I'm really sorry if that disappoints anyone. Sometimes people ask me, are you related to him? No, I'm not related to him. I checked. And I use he, him pronouns. I am, as of Monday of this week, the library director of the Longy School of Music of Bard College. But for most of my career, I have been a metadata librarian. And I've been on the Homosaurus editorial board since June 2022. And what this board tends to do is we tend to create new terms, we review current terms, and then people can suggest new terms or suggest edits to terms, all sorts of stuff. And so we go over those as well. It's pretty fun. So that tends to be what the editorial board does if people are curious as to how these decisions get made. We do post releases and updates on homosaurus.org if you're ever curious about the process. And just to put in context of these terms and what I'll be talking about, I am white, I am queer, and I am also transgender. Most of the people on the editorial board are white, queer, and there's a lot of trans people on the board, which is like good. But there are not many people of color, and there are not many people outside of the United States. And so that does definitely bias how we approve terms, how we come up with them, how we write our scope notes. Stuff like that. So I feel like that's important to put in context. So what? And this is like straight from our website. The Homosaurus is an international linked data vocabulary of LGBTQ terms that supports improved access to LGBTQ resources within cultural institutions. So this means libraries, archives, museums, galleries, anything like that. Feel free to use the Homosaurus. This is not just for libraries. Designed to serve as a companion to broad subject term vocabularies, the Homosaurus is a robust and cutting-edge vocabulary of LGBTQ specific terminology that enhances the discoverability of LGBTQ resources. And what that means is that we really do not intend people to use the Homosaurus by itself. Because its scope is so narrow, it's not going to cover everything. So no matter what standard, like what other vocabulary you might be using, Library of Congress subject headings, Getty, any of these other ones, you can use this like to complement it. And because it is linked data, it is like queryable and connects to Wikidata, which connects to like OCLC and the VIAF and all of these other sorts of authority places. So it connects to all of those as well if there's overlap, which is really nice. A brief timeline. So this actually started in 1997. This was version 0 and started as the thesaurus for ILIA, LGBT Heritage Collections. And so ILIA is in Amsterdam, and it's the International something. When you're a librarian and you forget what acronyms stand for, that just happened to me, but it's a LGBT heritage library in Amsterdam is where this all started. I actually got the physical copy of the thesaurus for my thesis when I wrote it, so that was really cool. Over a decade later, we get version 1. So Jack Vanderwell, who is from ILIA, and Ellen Greenblatt made it more inclusive with a hierarchical structure. So originally it was very like gay, lesbian, that focused, and was a flat structure. And so they decided to like bring in things about bisexual people, transgender people, sort of broaden the scope a bit, and also give it that more like genealogy type tree that like Library of Congress does, where there's like children and siblings and whatnot, instead of a flat structure. In 2015, KJ Rawson of the Digital Transgender Archive worked with Jack to transform version 1 into an online linked data vocabulary. And it is still sort of hosted with the Digital Transgender Archive. 2016 is when the editorial board is established, and the scope is then again narrowed to just LGBTQ specific terms. So it leaves in the sort of broad inclusivity of including bisexual people and transgender people, not so narrow, but it's not trying to cover everything in the entire universe anymore. It's not trying to be a comprehensive vocabulary anymore. 2019, we get like version 2, and that's probably the version most people are familiar with, but we have recently gone to version 3. Version 3.2, and that is where we are now. We have done so much cleanup and standardization because we got a grad student whose job it was to do that and help us do that. So it is like way better now. It's incredible if you've used it in the past and are now using it. It's a game changer. All right. When. So one of the questions that I often get, and especially the question that actually inspired this presentation when I first gave this kind of workshop a year ago, was, okay, there's terms about sex versus gender versus orientation. What's the difference between these things? When do you use which? Stuff like that. Because it's can be very confusing. So we're going to go over that a little bit. So caveat that this is kind of reductive, and that often, especially in like trans activism, we dislike the separation between like sex and gender. But it is very helpful, especially if you've got more biological or medical terminology. And it can help people sort of understand these concepts more. And we do have terms related specifically to sex in the Homosaurus. So sex, as in sex body, and sex assigned at birth, this is the quote biological sex of the person. So this is like based on the external factors that the doctor can see, chromosomes, stuff like that. Again, incredibly reductive, but that's what that is referring to. Gender is like gender identity, is the experience and internal feelings of a person. So if you're thinking about a transgender person, their gender is not what was assigned to them based on their biological sex at birth. Again, very reductive, but that is the distinction there, at least in common usage. Sex is more biological, quote. Gender is more internal in feelings, quote. That is the difference between those two. And then orientation is like sexual orientation or romantic orientation. And this refers to the direction, is a weird term for it, of an individual's attraction towards other individuals. So this is where like gay, lesbian, bisexual, those kinds of terms, that's where they live, is under orientation. How is a person relating to another person largely based on gender identity, but not always. And then, again, these are often discussed as separate facets of identity and experience, but again, it is more complicated than that. But for the purposes of cataloging, these are the separate facets of those things. Another common one is when you use LGBTQ plus versus queer. There used to be, a confusion. Hi, Arthur. This is my cat, King Arthur. Everyone say hi, King Arthur. He is going to help us by jumping onto my windowsill. There used to be like LGBTQ Buddhists, and then there'd be Buddhists, parentheses, LGBTQ. And that was very confusing. Like literally last year, I had to talk about that. Those have all been cleaned up. So if you were a person who had run into that before, that is no longer an issue. Hooray. So we have decided sort of two formats. There's the LGBTQ plus term, and then there's queer term, and these are plural. So there'd be like LGBTQ plus Buddhists, queer Buddhists. You use LGBTQ term, that's the umbrella term, right? This is talking about the concept of people like Buddhists, like a category of like an identity of person who might be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or some other flavor of LGBTQ plus, the little plus there. That's the umbrella term, like you would say LGBTQ community, right? You wouldn't call a person LGBTQ, for example. If you had a book about a I don't know, like a gay skateboarder or something. I hope there's a book about a gay skateboarder. I'd read that. That's fun. You would like, you might put LGBTQ plus skateboarders, but really you'd want like gay skateboarders because it's about like a person who is gay, for example. Queer term is actually referring to the quote specific identity queer. So if a person calls themselves queer, either gender, sexuality, whatever, this is not queer as an umbrella term. This is not queer community, queer people. Like this is not that umbrella term. This is referring to like, again, a specific individual versus an umbrella term of individuals. So an example is LGBTQ plus Buddhists, and then you can see underneath it queer Buddhists. So think of LGBTQ plus opens up to bisexual, gay, lesbian, transgender, and queer. And oh, there's another layer here, but that sort of that distinction, and you don't have to worry about Buddhists parentheses LGBTQ anymore because we cleaned that up. Thank you, our graduate intern who does that. Then we have slang. This one can get kind of fun. So my example for this is William Shakespeare walks into a gay bar, exit pursued by a bear. That's like my favorite joke in the entire world. So if you're not familiar, gay or bear in like gay slang refers to like a big hairy fat dude who identifies as a bear. There's like a whole bear community. They are awesome. But there's also bear as an animal, right? So some like queer slang uses very common words like bear or other animals. There's otter, there's cub, there's wolves. A lot of them are furry, and they normally refer to specific body types, sexual identities, or like gender roles within like gay and queer culture. Like stud can refer to a black butch lesbian. It's not like a stud in your wall, right? Or like a stud is like, tell me about it, stud, like not in the way they use it in Greece. Stuff like that. And then I'm not even going to go into Polari, but Polari is a whole other thing. And I think it is still important to use these terms when cataloging. They are important aspects of queer culture and history. One of the reasons we have slang, especially if we consider things like Polari. If you don't know, Polari is not exclusively queer. It grew out of like circus culture in England, I believe, and was like a lot of like circus and like travelers and queer people trying to evade being criminalized for things. And it's very similar to Cockney rhyming slang. And so the purpose of slang is to be able to talk about it without people knowing what you're talking about, so that you can talk about it in the open and not everything has to be so secret. And then no one knows what the heck you're talking about. If you've ever heard someone speak Polari, it's like, what are you talking about? It's really fun. So I think it's important to like capture that aspect of culture when you're cataloging something. Also, if you have a book about like bears, you should probably use bears. All right. And like the version of the term in other vocabularies might be structured differently or excluded entirely. And so an example of this is Homosaurus has bears, parentheses, gay culture, and otters, parentheses, gay culture. Library of Congress has bears, parentheses, gay culture, but otters, gay culture is a variant term. Those are not the same thing at all. Like if Library of Congress were to get on Grindr, they would run into some trouble, is what I'm saying. So that I think is an incorrect variant. So you need to look out for those kinds of things if they're included in other vocabularies. And then we have some outdated or derogatory terms, warning that some of these are slurs. I'm not going to say them. And some of them are outdated or derogatory terms against people and cultures who are not white, often indigenous cultures, where we thought those were the correct terms, but they were the terms assigned to them by like anthropologists and stuff. So just a general blanket warning for that right now. And so we do have the heading LGBTQ plus historical terms. So you could use that as a subject heading, but it's also a good way to look and see what historical terms there are for people and identities. And these are now considered outdated and or offensive. So we're gonna go real quick to the historical terms here. And you will see our hierarchy here. Again, some of these are slurs actively, but then you have things in here like MTFs and FTMs, which is actually still sometimes used. The term sodomy is considered here. Inverts and urinism and pederasty and all that stuff that's kind of associated with this like Greek classical thing, especially that got revived in like the late 19th century, like with Oscar Wilde and all them. Those are there. Oh no. So I gotta go through. Okay. And so for slurs, these are insulting or discriminating remarks, innuendos, or names intended to demoralize a person, which are usually based on that person's belonging to a particular social group. Typically, for a term to be considered a slur, it must be derogatory towards a particular person or group. It must be used to subordinate them within some structure of power relations. And the derogated person or group must be defined by an intrinsic property such as race, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. This category includes terms considered slurs at any point in their usage. Therefore, some of these terms may no longer be considered necessarily derogatory, may be in common usage now, or may be selectively reclaimed by certain groups. That is important to note here. Just because these are in the slurs category doesn't mean that they're currently slurs. They just were at some point and could maybe be used as a slur now if someone was being real mean to you, right? So this is our entire list. So you'll see on here, dykes is very common usage now. Like unless someone like shouting it at somebody within a power imbalance and like bad, that might be, but then you could just do the same with gay. And so it can be appropriate to use historical terms for materials, which those materials may or may not actually be historical, that discuss those identities using those terms. Again, like I am not necessarily, and this is my own opinion, your library or cultural institution might have other policies. I am not necessarily a fan of hiding the words that we have used to call people out of like shame and not reckoning with them. Obviously, we shouldn't use those terms for everything, but if there's for example, I was working at the University of Utah and I did some stuff with the Utah American Indian Digital Archive. And there's a lot of stuff in there from the white Mormon settler colonialists and the words that they were using for the Navajo and Ute people there. I think it's important to not like for us to not go, oops, they didn't use those words. Gonna hide those away. I think it's important to reckon with them. That's my opinion. That might not be your policy at your library. And again, I think this is particularly true in archival contexts where that's like that material used it, and it's not necessarily like a book someone is now writing about something. So you might want to consider your contexts for even the material when you might be thinking about using some of these terms. It is rarely appropriate to use slurs. However, some of those historical terms we looked at are also slurs, and some terms that had been slurs historically are larger reclaimed. So, for example, dykes is a term for lesbians and other queer women that can obviously be used and has been used in a derogatory way, but is still like often used among queer women, particularly as like a self-identifier. Therefore, it would be appropriate to assign dykes to like dykes to watch out for, right? Like that's in the title. I think that would be an appropriate term to assign to that material. So that's when you are looking at slurs, don't just write them off completely. Arthur's back. But when in doubt, especially when for terms referring to indigenous people or like quote culturally specific identities, do not use a term classified as a slur. Just don't do that. If a historical term or slur that would be appropriate refers to indigenous peoples or culturally specific identities, consider using other subject vocabularies if they exist. And also speak with members of your local tribe or tribes for how they would want to be described, if they want to be described or included at all. So before we go into the why, I'm going to look at the chat here. Someone looked it up, International Homo Lesbian Information Archive. Thank you, Monica. A question, what factors influence the Homosaurus board's decision to use LGBTQ as opposed to LGBTQIA+ or another acronym form? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I can look that up for you. You can also email the Homosaurus and ask that, because anyone, and you don't have to be a cataloger, you don't have to work in libraries, anyone can email, submit terms or ask questions to the Homosaurus editorial board. And then there is also that Google group listserv now, but I actually don't know. People are saying hi to King Arthur. All right. Are you working on making changes to Library of Congress, or would you recommend for those, or what would you recommend for those who might wish to see changes in LCSH? We are not doing anything with Library of Congress. Again, we are meant to complement and supplement existing vocabularies. So if Library of Congress has terms or doesn't, or they use them differently, ours is meant to like supplement and fill in those gaps, provide other context. We don't do anything with LCSH. Some of us, obviously like work in libraries and might be working in that realm as well. So for people who might wish to see changes in LCSH, there is this thing called the cataloging lab, which helps people like build proposals for changes in LCSH. And I believe the CritCat website has lists of like, here's the term in LCSH, here's the term you might want to use locally instead, that either has been rejected by Library of Congress or hasn't been submitted yet or something like that. I have mixed feelings about changing Library of Congress subject headings, because I kind of want to encourage people to not just use LCSH and to start using other vocabularies. But I know that that's not possible or the reality for a lot of libraries or other institutions. And the bonus of all of us using one vocabulary is that there's consistency across and like in indexes and stuff. So can you give an example of a term that is now historical but was not when Homosaurus first started? What is your process for making that determination, and what is the technical process for the changeover? I haven't been on the Homosaurus that long, but I can imagine that like FTM, MTF, transsexual, stuff like that, some of the trans vocabulary, I can imagine, early 90s, early 2000s versus 2022. I imagine those have been changes. What is the process for making that determination? The board talks about it. And often if it's out of our league, we will go find like a researcher or someone and like ask and collaborate with them. We are doing that a lot now with the sort of like indigenous terms, and like we'll often work with institutions to supplement our vocabulary. But I don't know, like we don't really have like documentation yet. We're working on it, but as to like public facing, here's our process for this, because it's kind of, we talk about it. So, can you give an example of how to apply the LGBTQ plus historical terms heading? Yeah, if it might be like if it's a book about one of those terms, that would be appropriate. Don't just put it on things that include those terms. That would again be a case of aboutness. I show that heading because it's a good way to look and see the list of the historical terms. Someone pointed out that queer is a term that has been reclaimed. Yes, absolutely. There's a Seiko funnel. Oh, okay, cool. Reach out to Harvard University Archives Group and Violet Fox of the Cataloging Lab, who we would all die without. Okay, I want to make sure we give some time for questions as well. Very good questions. I'm sorry that I didn't have more detailed answers for some of the more policy ones. But again, please feel free to email the editorial board. And again, we're working on documentation. We've been growing and growing and growing. So that's where we're at on that. We're still evolving. So why? Why might you assign these? So some things you might want to think about, because I hesitate to give blanket statements because everyone's community's needs are going to be different. So what I think you should think about is like, how are your patrons searching for materials? An example I like to give is I was at a Illinois Library Association conference, first year grad school. And there was a cataloger there who talked about how the way that he noticed that people were searching for video games was that like, regardless of the system, they would search PS2 or PS3, I think is what it was, PS4, whatever, PS4, I think. They would search PS4 regardless of the system. And so he went into every single video game in their system. He put in like a notes field or something, PS4, because that's how people were searching. Even if it was like an Xbox game or something, he'd put PS4 in like a notes field, just so that was like indexable and would come up when people were searching that way. So maybe think about, how are your patrons searching for materials? Who is the patron in your head? This is the thing I always have to catch myself doing. When I'm like, oh, how are people searching and using the catalog, and what are they looking for? Who is the person I'm thinking about? And who is left out of what I'm thinking about? There is not a library community. There are communities. There are different people and different ways. Like even if in a university library, a freshman is going to have different needs and search like strategies than someone with a PhD who's had that longer than I've been alive. Right. So think about like when you're making these decisions and when you're going through, like, who is it that you're actually thinking about and who is it that you're not thinking about? Try to maybe do some sort of like user testing and stuff, like, and reach out. But those are things to consider. Like the Gerber Hart Library and Archives in Chicago, which is a queer libraries and library and archives, their patrons are going to be searching way differently than the students at my music conservatory that I work at now, for example. And again, the Homosaurus is meant to complement existing vocabularies. Some of its terms are based on sort of current popular intra-community language, while others are from like other semantic realms. So you'll often see two terms that kind of mean the same thing, but one will be like a slang or like a identity term, and one will be the more like official term or something. And this brings up a good point that we do not do literary warrant. We very much think like, oh, there might be a use for this, or we're starting to hear people use these terms on forums and stuff, or on TikTok or something. Let's make a term for it. Let's build it out. I recently, over the past year, have been working on terms for slash fan fiction because there is research that is done on slash fan fiction. So if you ever do research or wanting to look for things about Kirk slash Spock, you soon will be able to assign that to, to materials, or furries, stuff like that. We didn't have a book that we saw and went, oh, we need this. It was very much based on like, I know that these are terms that are used on like Archive of Our Own, or we know that these are terms that, polyamorous people use, stuff like that. Oh my God, hold on a second. Apparently it's mowing day at my condo complex and I had my window open and it was loud. I'm sorry. All right. So how, very quickly, Mary says your search history system data should show you what actual people who came to your system used to search terms to inform those choices. Yes, I know that if you use Alma Primo, in the Primo analytics, you can see the like 100 most popular search terms, and you can also see like search terms that showed 0 results. I do want to caution against seeing the popular ones in like Primo, because what that often is going to be is the search terms that your instruction librarians use to teach people in instruction sessions. So word of caution for that, but then that might also be the terms that those students end up using. It's Web of Science most of the time. But that is a thing to look at. So how? What to do when there aren't scope notes? Many terms in the Homosaurus currently do not have scope notes. We know we are changing that. Thank you, our grad student, who is currently the person. And we all like work on scope notes, but that's one of the things is all new terms have to have scope notes. And we are retroactively going back and slowly adding scope notes. So we're sorry if you come across a term that has no scope note whatsoever. We are changing that. So resources, and again, these slides will be available. There is a non-binary wiki, and these aren't like official credited authority sources. These are just like things people in communities have made that we often use when we are developing terms. So the non-binary wiki, there's the asexuality visibility network wiki. There's the LGBT wikia, and there's a transgender language primer. And then this one is a might be considered quote not safe for work. There's a BDSM/kink glossary that is incredibly helpful. But yeah, just a caveat that again, these aren't any like central authorities or anything. Like a lot of these wiki ones are just made by like random teenagers sometimes. So again, treat them like you might treat Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia, but keep that in mind. But these are again the resources we use. Subdivisions is the big one. Homosaurus does not have subdivisions at all. Instead, what you can do is you can use a Homosaurus term alongside an LCSH term that supports form subdivisions. So you might do a 650 lesbian relationships and say that that's from the Homosaurus. We're homo it. you can homo it, and then do another 650 of lesbian couples subdivide fiction. So that's one way you can do it. I believe I saw this, like they were doing this at the University of Kentucky. You can also do a Homosaurus term as a 655. So you could do lesbian fiction, homo it as a 655. You can also suggest terms to us. Homosaurus.org/contact. We read every single one, I promise. And we talk about them like very seriously and often take like 2 hours to do it. Because we'll be like, hey, but wait a minute, what about in this instance? So I promise we look at them. All right, questions time. That is my email address for work. It's shiny and new. I currently like don't have a million emails in it. It's amazing. My calendar is empty even. It's nice. So that is where you can get a hold of me. You can also look in my GitHub for the slides. I'm going to stop sharing now so we can do questions. Yay.
Thanks so much, Jay. That was awesome.
All right. Use the like hand, your little Zoom hand for questions. If you don't know how to do that, you hit reactions and raise hand like that. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. Because I know that questions will generate other questions. Sarah, you're first up.
Hi, thanks so much for this. This is really excellent. We started for the first time in our catalog using or doing formal authority control through Backstage Library Works. And we, so they're applying Homosaurus terms for us. And so one of the reasons, and I had done my research ahead of time, knowing that we wanted to add these to the catalog, and I was just going to see what it looked like after they did our entire back file. And it's really interesting to see the overlap, the absolutely mind-blowing number of headings that we have ended up on our records. And I think the reason I want to bring that up is just partially to get it on the record that if you're using a service, they want to do this for you. It didn't cost anything extra. Obviously, we were new to the program, new to doing authority control through a system anyway, or through a company anyway. But now what I'm looking at is that I'm thinking about like how to actually make it useful for our patrons. And it's going to be weird because there are things in there that I technically signed off on, but I technically didn't. So partially my question is, do you know of other libraries that have basically jumped in, with both feet, or any tips for kind of, explaining yourself now that you're in the deep end?
Well, I know the University of Kentucky was one that was like going through, if there's any University of Kentucky people here, that was like going through and adding Homosaurus stuff to like all their records. So I think they were doing it manually. Like I don't think they were using a service like
That's
that.
wild.
I haven't heard of people doing that. That's neat.
Yeah.
But yeah, people might want to reach out to the University of Kentucky. They're a big one.
Right.
Again, I can, now that I'm not sharing my screen anymore, I
Yeah, a
can,
link to the listserv would be fantastic.
yes, that is what I'm going to do. It's a Google group, and it is the Homo It community, which is fun. How do I share? How do I share a group?
Can you send the group's email? And if you email the group, will they add you to it?
I think so. About, okay. It is Homo It community at googlegroups.com is that email address on Google Groups. So God, they really had to choose today to mow outside, huh? I don't know if y'all can hear that. It's really loud and annoying. Oh God. Okay. All right. And do people know how to join Google Groups with just an email? So I'm hoping that's helpful. But if not, I can look up more information for that and give it to Angela so she can send it out to folks. Sarah, did you have anything else?
Nope, that was good.
Okay, can you raise your hand just so I can make sure I see other people's
Oh,
hands? Yeah. Thank you. All right, Mary, you're up.
So we would really like to start using the Homosaurus terms in our catalog, but the part that's kind of stopping me that I'm hoping you can give me some guidance on is how to make appropriate decisions about what should have these terms attached to it after the fact. Like if I have a new book in front of me and I'm assessing it, that doesn't seem too onerous, but I have thousands of records. How do I figure out retroactively what things should have had these terms? Is there a method or a theory or something you could point me to about that problem?
That is a very good question. I don't know how other libraries, again, you might want to look at the University of Kentucky's. I think it was done during the link data for conference last year, I think was when that presentation happened. I would say like look at circulation logs, honestly. And then one thing when I was at the university, my previous position, one thing that we were going to do like overall to start testing, like doing alternative vocabularies and local headings, was to start very small. So maybe start with like we were like, oh, okay, let's start with what's currently on course reserves right now, like an academic library, right? So like things like that, like I haven't worked in a public library, but maybe like things that you are going to put on a display or an exhibit or something. Things that you've used in a program recently. Just like things that are getting used. Like maybe do like a just in time approach to it. Cause like I don't know who has time to go back and look through. But if you're noticing a book getting used, or if you're going to put it on exhibit, maybe do a quick like, oh, could this benefit from some Homosaurus terms? That would be my suggestion, but other libraries who've done this might have different opinions, and that's what that listserv is for, is for people that talk about what they're doing. We are trying to work on documentation and stuff for like, okay, how do you actually implement this thing? Because we don't have any right now, and I know that's really frustrating.
Is there
People.
like thank you. Is there like any sort of a crosswalk tool of like the things in this Dewey number are likely to need these headings, or these LC subject headings would benefit from some expansion or things like that?
Oh, I don't think there is right now. Because all I know of is like, because they are linked data, if you go into like Library of Congress or the VIAF or anything, it will automatically be like, oh, here's the Homosaurus term that links to this. Like you can go in Wikidata and look at it, but I don't know of any sort of like automatic crosswalks that are happening.
Okay, but that sort might really do it though, because if I can see LCHS, these have Homosaurus terms, and then I look in my catalog for, do I have those LC terms? That might at least get me a beginning path, I think.
Right, and we do tend to, in the terms themselves, say, I think we do, I might be lying to you, let me double check that. I'm pretty sure there are, let me look at some bears, because I know that there's that okay, yeah, so we do have external exact matches in the Homosaurus even. So if you go to like bears gay culture, in the Homosaurus at the bottom, it will have external exact match that takes you to bears gay culture and Library of Congress. And if you look at the Library of Congress subject heading, it will have a like a Wikidata thing and like a VIF thing and a Homosaurus thing. Like, but that would be really nifty for someone to write a crosswalk. I wonder if someone could be really nice and do that for like Mark Edit or Open Refine. That'd be nice. I'm not smart enough to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's given me some good ideas.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. All right. Is it Margar? How do you pronounce your name?
Oh, Margar.
Margar. Okay.
Margar or Margaret. I use she, her pronouns. I wanted to say, first of all, unfortunately, at Cincinnati State Library, we are a cataloging staff of one who is also our archivist. And although I would love for her to have the time to homo it as many of our records as possible, I can't put that on her right now. I'm putting it into the universe to become an assistant cataloger there, but we have to get a bigger budget first. So I'm here today because I'm really interested in any kind of crossover work between the fabulous activism and work that Homosaurus has already done. And then I've been working directly with Amber Billy and Violet Fox, Adam Schiff, other rock stars in the cataloging, the critical cataloging community on our new Seiko funnel. And I wanted to ask you, within the Homosaurus editorial board, how do you make determinations when you're dividing up intellectual labor? So in other words, kind of what's the workflow when you get a new term other than just kind of talking about it for a couple hours? I'm sure that there's so much more technical work that goes into who's actually going to end up doing what.
Right, that's a good question. As far as like intellectual labor goes, we do have like a bunch of spreadsheets and stuff, and like there have to be like so many people on the board, like depending on if it's going to be a term that's a little spicy and maybe controversial or something, or like we have like that one, like, okay, we might actually need to like do this in a meeting. But for some of them where it's kind of a no-brainer, it'll be like, okay, we need like 2 people to sign off on this, and then we don't really need to talk about it. As far as like divvying up like who's creating them and who's writing them and whatnot, it's based on interest. I volunteered to do the fan fiction, like slash fiction stuff, because I was like, hey, I know a lot about this right now, and I think it'd be fun to be the like chaotic person who puts the Omegaverse in like the Homosaurus. And I know that there's like a whole journal and like research that happens, yeah, that studies this. This is a legitimate field of study. There is a like fan fiction archive in Idaho, maybe. So I did that. I know Bree is very big on doing, like Bree Watson is very big on doing like the non-monogamous terms and whatnot. Claire does a lot of the more like medical terms because she works in medical vocabulary a lot. We volunteer for it. We don't like divvy it out. And then when it's coming to like approving them, it's kind of just like, okay, who's signing off on this? That legitimately, that's how the labor is divided off. It's kind of like, what can you handle at the moment? And then you volunteer for it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I have just one more question, if I may.
Yeah.
How do you determine when it's important for an individual subject heading or subject string to be intersectional versus when it feels like that's getting into the weeds? I mean, obviously queerness is like incredibly complex for a reason. It's many Venn diagrams going in all directions. But, you know, one thing I've been thinking about is like, if I click on, you know, for example, bears gay culture, what if I'm specifically looking for bears in the Black community? You know, so because if I click on bears gay culture, I'm probably going to get a lot of books about white people, and that's not what I'm searching for as a patron.
Right. Oh my God. Can you hear me? Is that way too loud? Do I need to like move to another room?
You're good.
Because it's very loud and annoying to me. I want to yell at them. That is a great question. We are actually like, especially because we're a bunch of white people mainly, we have been trying to collaborate as much as possible with other groups and archives and like researchers and stuff. So I believe right now we've been working with someone who does like Latina, Latinx like history and stuff to help with that. I think we've been wanting to maybe collaborate somehow with like the in Philly, the Black archives. We've been working with the leather archives a lot for like leather and kink terminology. But otherwise I think sometimes what our strategy has been to like pick this term and then pick the demographic term and then like do that kind of combination. But we are very aware of sort of the racial holes in the vocabulary. We are also wanting to work more with like indigenous, because there's a bunch of like indigenous vocabularies that are popping out there. And so like, where can we bring some of that stuff in? Where can they bring some of our stuff in? You know, how might we supplement each other? That kind of thing. But if you ever like have suggestions or ideas or like, oh, hey, I think this should be a term, submit it and we'll talk about it. And when we make decisions about like adding terms, we try to be transparent about that. But yeah, for intersectional terms where it's like, I think there are like ethnic and racial categories for like Black lesbians, I think, you know, that kind of thing in there. But for like bears, gay culture, yeah, that one, it would be like Black bears, gay culture, and then like versus like Black men as like two separate headings. That might not be the best way to do it right now. But we do have some where the race or ethnicity is included and some that aren't. And I know people are going to assume that if there's not, that then the default is white, and we are aware of that. So that is a very good question. Thank you. Did I answer it?
Yes, thanks so much, Jay. On behalf of our Seiko funnel, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And Amber is on the board. And so like she often is like our crossover between like the LC, like Seiko, NACO, all that stuff, and us. So Amber Billy is on the editorial board of the Homosaurus, just FYI. So we are aware of a lot of that. And I was on the little ad hoc task force for telling you stop putting gender in name authority records. So like Amber and I were both part of that. So we do cross-pollinate sometimes and are aware of stuff going on.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. See, we have a couple of minutes. Do we have any final like questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, yay for no gender and authority works. Do you have no idea how many meetings we had of just like yelling about, is it worth it to put this in or not? Like
I was at ALA and I was at the presentation where they talked about this, and one person came up to the mic and was very seriously like, but what if they're two completely equal people for whom there are no other characteristics other than gender to differentiate them? And they had to be very kind and say, I think there are other things that they could use to differentiate them than gender. It was very funny.
Yeah, we had a lot of in like our task force meetings, because we were literally just going with like, we had written whole documents on how we think it should be done. And then stuff started changing in RDA, and then we realized like, what if we just like what if we just say no? What if we just tell people not to do this?
And PCC also says no, which is great.
Yeah, like because we had been thinking like in discovery environments moving forward with having the gender allow for like cool linked data stuff, like trying to like future think ahead of like how might this fit ahead, but we ultimately just went like, no, just don't. So okay, the lawnmowers are quieter now. Is there anything else? Thank you. And I'm very excited for my new role. It's weird to not be a metadata librarian anymore, but I'm also a solo librarian. So I will have to do some metadata and cataloging, but I have to do a bunch of other stuff now, including like a budget, which is fun and new for me. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. This was so enlightening, and we so appreciate you coming today and speaking with us. And just a little plug, Jay is actually going to be giving a presentation on Homosaurus at the NHLA joint NELA NHLA conference this October. So if you're in Manchester, New Hampshire, come on up and join us there. But thanks, everyone.
And you can always reach out to the Homosaurus and have any of us like come do like presentations or trainings and stuff. Just ask. We like to do it.
Awesome.
And it was nice to see some names I recognize and friends. Hi, friends. Thank you for coming.